Hi, second graders. Today we're going to be working on story settings. So we have four books to listen to, and while the books are playing, I challenge you to draw what you hear. I'm going to go ahead and present.
Illustrated by John Claassen. Read by Nicola Barber. On a cold afternoon, in a cold little town, where everywhere you looked was either the white of snow or the black of soot from chimneys, Annabelle found a box filled with yarn of every colour. So she went home and knit herself a sweater. And when Annabelle was done, she had some extra yarn. So she knit a sweater for Mars, too. But there was still extra yarn. And when Annabelle and Mars went for a walk, Nate pointed and laughed and said, "You two look ridiculous." "You're just jealous," said Annabelle. "No, I'm not," said Nate. But it turned out he was. And even after she'd made a sweater for Nate, and his dog, and for herself, and for Mars, she still had extra yarn. At school, Annabelle's classmates could not stop talking about her sweater. "Quiet!" shouted Mr. Norman. "Quiet, everyone!" "Annabelle, that sweater of yours is a terrible distraction. I cannot teach with everyone turning around to look at you." "Then I'll knit one for everyone," Annabelle said, "so they won't have to turn around." "Impossible," said Mr. Norman. "You can't." But it turned out she could. And she did. Even for Mr. Norman. And when she was done, Annabelle still had extra yarn. So she knit sweaters for her mum and dad, and for Mr. Pendleton, and Mrs. Pendleton, and for Dr. Palmer, and for little Lewis. She made sweaters for everyone, except Mr. Crabtree, who never wore sweaters or even long pants, and who would stand in his shorts with the snow up to his knees. "No sweater for me, thanks," said Mr. Crabtree. So she made Mr. Crabtree a hat. And even then, Annabelle still had extra yarn. She made sweaters for all the dogs, and all the cats, and for other animals too. Soon, people thought, soon Annabelle will run out of yarn. But it turned out she didn't. So Annabelle made sweaters for things that didn't even wear sweaters. Things began to change in that little town. News spread of this remarkable girl who never ran out of yarn, and people came to visit from around the world to see all the sweaters and to shake Annabelle's hand. One day, an archduke who was very fond of clothes, sailed across the sea and demanded to see Annabel. "Little girl," said the archduke, "I would like to buy that miraculous box of yarn, and I am willing to offer you $1 million. "No, thank you," said Annabel, who was knitting a sweater for a pickup truck. The archduke's moustache twitched. $2 million, he said. Annabel shook her head. "No, thanks." $10 million, shouted the archduke. "Take it or leave it." "Leave it," said Annabel. "I won't sell the yarn." And she didn't. So that night, the archduke hired 3 robbers to break into Annabel's house. And they stole the box and took it to the archduke, who set off across the snow and sailed over the sea. Back to his castle. The archduke put on his favorite song and sat in his best chair. Then he took out the box and he lifted its lid and he looked inside. His moustache quivered. It shivered. It trembled. The archduke hurled the box out the window and shouted, "Little girl, I curse you with my family's curse. You will never be happy again." But it turned out she was.
The Snowy Day by Ezra Jack Keats. One winter morning, Peter woke up and looked out the window. Snow had fallen during the night. It covered everything as far as he could see. After breakfast, he put on his snowsuit and ran outside. The snow was piled up very high along the street to make a path for walking. Crunch, crunch, crunch. His feet sank into the snow. He walked with his toes pointing out, like this. He walked with his toes pointing in, like that. Then he dragged his feet slowly to make tracks. found something sticking out of the snow that made a new track. It was a stick that was just right for smacking a snow-covered tree. Down fell the snow, plop, on top of Peter's head. He thought it would be fun to join the big boys in their snowball fight. But he knew he wasn't old enough. Not yet. So he made a smiling snowman. And he made angels. He pretended he was a mountain climber. He climbed up a great, big, tall, heaping mountain of snow and slid all the way down. He picked up a handful of snow, and another, and still another. He packed it round and firm and put the snowball in his pocket for tomorrow. Then he went into his warm house. He told his mother all about his adventures while she took off his wet socks. And he thought and thought and thought about them. Before he got into bed, he looked in his pocket. His pocket was empty. The snowball wasn't there. He felt very sad. While he slept, he dreamed that the sun had melted all the snow away. But when he woke up, his dream was gone. The snow was still everywhere. New snow was falling. After breakfast, he called to his friend from across the hall, and they went out together into the deep, deep snow.
And there you have two really amazing stories that have two different settings. One, you might have drawn some objects or maybe even a neighborhood covered in yarn. And this last one, you probably have some kind of winter scene. Amazing. I can't wait to see what you draw on this next story. It's called Maxwell Moose's Mountain Monster. Let's hear what it's all about.
Animal Antics A to Z. Maxwell Moose's Mountain Monster by Barbara DeRobertis. Illustrated by R.W. Alley. Read by Barbara DeRobertis. Maxwell Moose moved closer to the campfire. This was his last camping trip of the summer. On Monday morning, he would be going back to Alphabetti School. Maxwell loved camping in the mountains. He loved smoky campfires. He loved telling stories. And he especially loved camping with his chums, Mitzi Mouse and Murphy Muskrat. "Tell us a spooky story, Maxwell," said Mitzi. "About the mountain monster," said Murphy. Maxwell's mountain monster stories were their favorite part of camping out. "Sure," Maxwell smiled, "after we make s'mores." "Yum, yum, yummy, s'mores for our tummies," sang Mitzi Mouse and Murphy Muskrat. Maxwell got out marshmallows, graham crackers, and chocolate bars. He mashed the marshmallows onto some twigs. "Hold these over the campfire," Maxwell said. Mitzi's marshmallow smoked and bubbled. Murphy's marshmallow melted and oozed. Maxwell slid the marshmallows onto the melting chocolate and graham crackers, and the three chums munched on their s'mores. "Mmm," they hummed, "messy but amazing." A million stars twinkled. The moon was smiling down. It was a magical moment. The campfire dimmed. "Time for some spooky stories," said Maxwell. "Oh, yes," said Mitzi and Murphy. "Tell us about the mountain monster." Maxwell began. "Once upon a time, there was a mountain monster living right here." "He was humongous," said Maxwell. "He had massive muscles. He was smelly and mean. But the scariest thing about him was his scream." Maxwell made a terrible monster moan. "Hoo, hoo." Mitzi and Murphy trembled. "He's just a make-believe monster," they murmured to each other, but they moved closer to Maxwell Moose. Maxwell continued. "One night, the mountain monster woke up hungry. He marched down the mountain like a zombie. He was looking for yummy munchies, like worms and mushrooms and fingers and toes." Mitzi pushed her fingers into her pockets. Murphy pulled his coat down over his toes. They both moved even closer to Maxwell. "The mountain monster saw a campfire," Maxwell said in a booming voice, "and he smelled s'mores." "Mmm," said the monster, "I like s'mores, but I love little mouse fingers and little muskrat toes." Mitzi and Murphy both screamed. "The mountain monster is imaginary! He's imaginary! Isn't he, Maxwell?" Suddenly, they heard a terrible moan. "Ooh!" Maxwell jumped. He looked frightened. "That moan wasn't from me," he whispered. "It came from the mountain," cried Mitzi. "It came from the monster," cried Murphy. A rumbling, bumbling shape was moving toward them. Mitzi screamed, "We're doomed!" Murphy screamed, "We're monster food!" Maxwell's voice trembled as he called out, "Who's there? Are you the mountain monster?" A voice called back, "Maxwell, calm down. It's me, your mother." "Oh, Mama!" cried Maxwell. Mama Moose moved into the light of the campfire. "It's mighty chilly," she said, "so I've come with some mittens and earmuffs for you." Mama Moose put her arms around Maxwell, Mitzi, and Murphy. "Let's put another log on the campfire," she said. "I also brought you some oatmeal muffins and mushroom soup. You need more than just s'mores to eat." Soon their tummies were warm and full, and their eyes were sleepy. Mama Moose said, "I'm going home now, Maxwell, so please don't tell any more stories about that imaginary mountain monster." Maxwell Moose called out, "Wait, Mama! What if the mountain monster is real? What if he does come?" "Just make him s'mores, Maxwell," she told him. "He actually likes them much better than mouse fingers or muskrat toes or moose tails." Maxwell, Mitzi, and Murphy all laughed. "See you in the morning," Maxwell called out to Mama. Then he whispered to Mitzi and Murphy, "After we make more s'mores for breakfast." The three chums put out their campfire for the night, and within minutes, the only sound on the mountain was the sound of snoring.
Okay, so that was 3 different stories with different settings. If you were going to make a story, what would your setting be? If you have enough time, please draw a picture of your story setting. Is it underground? In the jungle? Underwater? In the mountains? In a river? Perhaps your story is even in your neighborhood in a big city. I can't wait to see what you come up with. Auf Wiedersehen and have fun.